You may begin.
Thanks and good evening. This is an open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. I'm Joshua Levy, Chair of the Needham Finance Committee. It's Wednesday, December 8th, 2021, and the meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless the law requires it. This meeting will not have public comment except in connection with the first item of business, citizen request to address the Finance Committee. First, I will confirm that a quorum of members of the Finance Committee are present. When I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Rick Lunetta.
Here.
Tom Jacob. Tom's on mute. John Connolly.
Here.
Barry Kaufman.
Here.
The chair is here. And I see some other people joining as well. We'll wait for them to come on video.
So I'm not sure I can do video. I have to turn my camera around somehow.
That's okay. I hear you, Louise. So you're here.
All right, thank you.
And Tom, oh, you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
And Carol Fischetti. Could you unmute and let us know you're here? Can you hear us, Carol?
I can now. Sorry.
Okay.
Having technical difficulties.
No worries. Okay, welcome everyone. As a reminder, anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. And as a preliminary matter, I would ask for a motion to continue this meeting to December 15th, 2021 in the event of a technical disruption this evening.
So moved.
Second.
I'll call the roll. Rick Lunetta.
Here.
John Connolly.
Here.
Tom Jacob.
Aye.
Barry Kaufman.
Yes.
Louise Miller. Carol Fischetti.
Here.
We're voting to continue the meeting to next week in the event of technical disruptions. How do you vote, Carol?
Yes.
Okay. And Louise Miller?
Yes.
Okay. So that passes. We'll turn to the agenda. First is a citizen request to address the Finance Committee. If there is a Needham resident who wishes to address the Finance Committee, please use the raise hand feature through Zoom to indicate that you would like to speak. If you are on the telephone, you can also press *9. I see one person raising their hand, Noah Mertz. Dave, would you pull that person over?
I will. Bringing Noah in right now.
Okay. Just as a reminder, this is an opportunity for citizens to let us know anything that's on their mind. It's not typically a back and forth, but we're always appreciative of hearing what you have to say. Welcome, Noah.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm currently living in my car, which is why it looks like I'm in a car. I am in a car. But yes, I'm still involved with what's going on back home in Needham. I've been working with a group called Equal Justice in Needham, particularly on the issues of public safety, oversight, and accountability since the George Floyd uprisings last summer. Thank you for having me today. I have a statement prepared to read, so I guess I'll just take it away. So this is hopefully helpful as a context piece for the discussions that you all are having about budget concerns and also financial risk factors to the town. So this budget discussion is being conducted in the context of an ongoing federal civil rights lawsuit against our town and the Needham Police Department. The lawsuit reminds us of the financial risk to taxpayers that is created by the current disparities in police interactions and outcomes by race. According to the Needham Police Department's own data, in 2019-2020, Black and Hispanic people were 4 times more likely to be handcuffed, 6 times more likely to be charged with a criminal offense, and 4 times more likely to be arrested than those who are white. The Needham Police Department has still not provided any clear explanation for these disparities. The existence of these disparities creates financial risk not just from the increased insurance costs that this lawsuit will result in, but if these disparities persist, from possible future lawsuits whose financial impacts could be even greater because of the existence of this prior. Thus, as you examine the departmental budget increases being sought here, the Finance Committee should seek a clear statement of the actions of the department has taken and plans to take to address these disparities and mitigate future financial risk for our taxpayers. In the case of Mr. Marvin Henry, multiple significant policy violations were revealed not by an internal affairs investigation as they should have been, but rather by an outside investigation that taxpayers had to bear the additional cost of funding. In most contexts, the main deterrent against future violations of policy is to demonstrate that those who violate policies suffer consequences. In this particular case, not only did the Needham Police Department.
So Noah, I think we've lost your audio a bit.
Can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. In this particular case, the Marvin Henry incident, not only did the Needham Police Department internal investigation fail to uncover these violations at all, but it does not appear that any consequences have fallen on those who committed these violations after they were revealed by the Tidwell report. It is thus not clear what has been done to address and prevent the possibility of such violations being repeated in the future. We urge the Finance Committee, as part of its fiduciary responsibilities, to obtain a clear statement of the department's plan to address existing racial disparities in police outcomes, and then monitor progress on such a plan in the coming years to ensure that the financial risk to taxpayers is indeed being mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Noah. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anyone. Thank you, Noah, again. Dave, would you mind moving Noah back to the attendee list? And I think we can move on to the next agenda item, the approval of the minutes of prior meetings. We have two meeting minutes, the open sessions of October 5th, 2021 and of December 1st, 2021. Are there any comments?
No comments, and I move their acceptance.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? We'll call the roll then. Rick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Carol. You're on mute, Carol.
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. If I skip anyone, please holler because I'm not seeing everyone on the screen all the time. So the next item of business is starting our department budget hearings for fiscal year 2023. We'll start with the resident committees. So these are Memorial Park Trustees, the Commission on Disabilities, Historical Commission. These committees perform crucial functions for the town and have smaller budgets than other town departments. I'll just quickly summarize some of the differences between the current fiscal year 22 budget and the proposed or requested fiscal year 2023 budget requests. For the Commission on Disabilities, this is on tab 16 in your binders. There's a change to move $100 from the other line item to travel and mileage, but there's no net change in the overall budget. For Historical Commission, tab 17, moving $450 from the communications line to other supplies and equipment. Again, no net change. And for the Memorial Park Trustees on tab 20, there's no change in any line items. Are there any comments or discussion for these? Okay. Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Just to let you know that the chair of the Historic Commission is trying to log on, but has not yet logged on. So when she arrives, I will let the committee know, but I think it's safe to move forward with the next budget in the meantime.
Okay, yeah, we're happy to come back to those, to the Historical Commission. The next, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Luis.
Sorry, I have my phone in front of my computer now, which is confusing me. So I had a question on the Commission on Disabilities. So they get funding from fines for parking violations. And I'm just wondering if we have an update or if we could get an update of what the total amount is that was collected and what the Commission on Disability spent that collected amount for.
Dave, if you have that, let us know. I would also understood it to be specifically to fines related to handicap parking violations.
Yes.
I can reach out to the committee and get that information for you for your next meeting.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, the chair of the Historic Commission is now with us.
Oh, perfect. Would you move her over?
Yes, I will. This is Rose Doherty.
Welcome, Rose. Can you hear us? Welcome, Rose. You're on mute.
Yep. Okay, there we are.
Perfect. Do you want to give an introduction to your budget and talk through any updates for how you're operating?
Our we have a new operation internally. We are changing chairs every year, which I think is an extremely healthy thing to do. We will do so you'll see someone else next year at this time, but it means that everyone on the commission is trained in how things go forward. And we are very interested in helping the town understand a lot more about the history and value the history. And we will do that in various ways. We will be sending letters to people who buy historic homes, telling them what they have purchased. It's a small outreach, but it still needs to be done. We will also, I think, try to make ourselves a little bit more visible during the year. You probably have the same problems that I do when I'm trying to explain that the Historical Commission is not the Needham Museum and History Center. It was worse, I think, when we had the Needham Historical Society, but it still has not changed completely. So we are working at making ourselves more visible to the public. We are, I think, also going to be doing some interesting new ventures, which I can tell you more about, but they are really just in the planning stages, where we will be taking a look at. Am I not coming through?
You are. I think there's just a little feedback.
Oh, okay. Anyhow, we are taking a look as part of our Newari efforts. We're going to be taking a look at the non-white people who lived in Needham and see, we think that there are a couple of houses that have had enslaved people in the 17th century. We think that's a very important thing to make public and let folks know. We are committed to making ourselves more visible. Are there any questions? Yes, go ahead. Rick Lunetta.
Go ahead, Rick.
Ms. Doherty, how many new plaques have been requested in this last fiscal year?
There have not been any. And the plaques are because the inventory is small and the plaques are up for those houses that want them. So there haven't been any required in the past year. Actually, yes.
One more follow-up. Does that seem to be a trend here in the community?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Louise.
So you do have a communications budget, and I'm just wondering what your plans are this year for spending the communications budget. It seems like the commission does not spend most of its budget. So I'm just curious what your plans are.
Well, we had a grand plan before COVID hit. We were going to have an event for all of the owners of historic houses to get together to find out, well, then you know what happened to that. We even had a keynote speaker who was the, at that point, the head of Mass Historical and also on the Historical Commission in Concord. So he would have been wonderful, but it didn't happen. But we're not giving up. We are all going to get through this and things will return. And that's how we're going to be spending some money as things move forward.
Good. I like to hear that you're increasing your awareness and making people, understand more about what the Historical Commission does.
I think it is absolutely essential. I spend time when I go out to dinner with people, I have to explain the difference between the Historical Commission and what people still call the Historical Society. And I know Gloria has the same difficulty and so do others. So it reminds me very much of the kind of problem that I had when I was president of the Library Foundation. And no one could understand why there was a foundation. There was also a group of friends, and it took us several years to actually make people understand that there really was a difference, but it's worth doing. And educating people about the history of the town is, I think, a great plus for us because we've got so much going for us.
I agree. Thank you. I'm glad you could join us tonight.
Yes, sorry, I was a bit late.
No, that's not what I meant.
I had Great Plain room down, so you know where I was before 7 o'clock.
I apologize. We did
Sorry
make
about that.
a change at the last minute. I apologize for that.
Okay.
And thank you. It's very helpful for us to hear from all the different committees.
Okay.
Thank you, Rose.
I hope to come back to you next year with, well, I won't be here, but the next person will have even bigger plans for you.
We look forward to it.
Have a good
Okay,
year.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Rose, I'll send it back to the attendees.
I guess if there aren't any other questions about the resident commissions, we can move on to the next budget hearing, which is the police department on tab 9. I believe the chief is in the attendees list. Would you bring the chief over?
Yep,
Dave? Thank you.
I am working on that.
Rick and I are the liaisons to the police department. We met with the chief earlier this month. And Rick has some words to introduce the budget.
And the chief is coming in.
I do have Deputy Chief Baker here with me as well.
Excellent. Welcome, Chief, and welcome, Deputy Chief Baker. I'm going to hand it off to Rick, who can give a brief summary, and then I think we'll hand it off to you, John, to discuss more about it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fellow members, as Josh said, we both met with the chief and Chris just a little while back, and let me just give you an overview of our conversation on this FY23 budget. Things by and large in terms of staffing and hardware have just increased a bit in terms of staffing levels. They have 63 employees in the department. 53 of them are officers, 5 are dispatchers, 1 is an animal control officer, 1 is a mechanic, and there are 3 admin personnel. And the vehicle count has pretty much stayed the same. There are 21 of them, 11 cruisers, 3 detective vehicles, 1 chief, 1 lieutenant, 1 unmarked, 1 animal, and 2 motorcycles. And to get really down in the weeds, 1 is rented and 1 is owned by the town, and then there's 1 pickup truck. In general, the chief said because of COVID, that overall responses are down, and that pretty much is in line with what other towns are doing, and also with the fire service as well. It's important to note that the current collective bargaining agreement expired in June of 2019, and there have been annual extensions year over year since then. Negotiations are in progress, The proposed FY23 decrease of $24,907 from FY22 in the salary and wage line, Chief tells us, is reflective of vacancies being replaced by lower costing personnel. Not unlike past extensions, though, the salary and wage overall number includes FY23 projected expenses for longevity and overtime, and the contract, I suspect, will be extended. Overall expenses are up by $48,177, as you've read, or 11% over FY22. This is primarily due to the price of gasoline, and we use a 3-year average, as you well know, at 8,000 gallons, and went up to $3.67 from last fiscal year, $2.45. The second piece of increase is $15,300 for maintenance and repairs of the new micro towers. The department received a total of $157,893 in grants. That fundamentally is fairly constant to FY22. The main suppliers pretty much remain the same, and the dollar amount doesn't fluctuate, but a couple pennies either way. Currently, there are 6 vacancies in the department. However, individuals have been identified to fill 5 of these. They'll all be starting the academy in the spring of 2022. There are 2 potential retirees in FY23, and the increase in capital requests of $144,000 represents replacing 4 frontline cruisers, and it's in keeping with the department's vehicle replacement schedule. The DSR 4, this position referenced is a master's level mental health clinician from Riverside Community Care, to be shared equally as in last fiscal year with the town of Dedham. Riverside continues to be the employer of record, and as such, the $45,000 is the department's annual fee for said clinical resource. Currently, as you recall, this position is funded through a warrant article. I'll let the chief speak to how this proposed position increases department efficiencies, overall service delivery, and why it should be included in the department's budgetary process. Absent a collective bargaining agreement, which will undoubtedly increase the department's overall cost as presented here, the FY23 proposed budget of $7,901,280 represents an increase of $212,998 or 2.8% over FY22. Mr. Chairman, I would like to invite comments from the chief and questions from fellow members. I turn it back over to you. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Rick. Chief, would you like to discuss your budget in more detail?
Sure. Good evening, and thank you for having us tonight. Obviously, Rick gave you a brief overview of the department's budget request. And there are issues that we see within policing in future years that might impact on how we operate. Obviously, with the current climate in policing, it's recruitment and retention and officer wellness are going to be increasingly important and also difficult for us. As you know, for example, in the past, people from Needham that took the civil service test to become police officers used to be, from 100 to a couple hundred people. Last year, the last civil service test, we had 12 residents from Needham take the test. So also on the retention side, we do have a lot of younger officers that have questioned, their job profession at this point in terms of, they've only been here several years, so they're not too far along in their career and have started to question and look for different avenues of employment. So that is something that we're going to be facing in terms of trying to retain the officers that we have and to recruit qualified officers. When I speak with the DSR 4, we've had a chance to look at that for the last year. And operationally, I think it's been a great success. And it's hard to pull out numbers and to determine, you know, how much maybe it saved from patrol response and so forth. But what I can say is that Officer Forte, a community outreach officer, worked quite well with our clinician from Riverside. And not only were they able to respond in the field, but having that clinician from Riverside we're able to use that in difference from somebody that might be employed by the town, because a clinician that is employed by Riverside has the ability to do in-home evaluations. She has access to medical records, has the ability to create medical records, and deal with mental health and substance abuse. But the access to beds, what's that?
Find beds, yeah.
And find beds. So usually in the past, what we did is we'd take them to the emergency room, whether it be BI, Needham, or Newton Wellesley, and they'd have to go through the process there. There are times now that we're able to do that evaluation in the home, and she can actually access those beds, and then we can transport that person to that facility. And another impact that we're seeing with having this position is the relationships that our community outreach officer and our clinicians have with our residents. So in the past, our community outreach officer this past year has probably been on phone calls for what he estimates to be about 750 hours. That's outside his co-response. That's outside their in-person follow-ups. And in the past, those 750 hours of phone calls would have gone to our dispatch center, and our dispatch center would have to deal with these individuals and possibly send a cruiser to do a well-being check. And we've been able to do that the communication and the relationship that our community outreach officer and our clinician have made with our, say, frequent flyers in town has allowed them to call those individuals, taking those calls away from our dispatch center and away from a response. So it's only been a year, but it's been extremely well received, and it's been a great benefit to not only the police department, but I think to our residents as well.
Thank you, Chief. I guess I'll open it up to questions from the Finance Committee. Go ahead, Louise.
Thank you. So I have a number of questions and comments. So the first one is with respect to the dollars per gallon, and that might be directed more to Dave Davison. I'm using a $4 per gallon guideline for fiscal year 23. And so that's just a comment, Dave, in terms of what the guideline is and whether we might need to raise it a little bit. Then I have some questions. One, regarding the Citizens Academy, what is that $1,000 expense for? Secondly, the replacement schedule going from 2 to 4. I thought that a few years ago we had worked really hard to try to flatten the replacement schedule so that we wouldn't have fluctuations. So I'm wondering if we could have that replacement schedule for the police vehicles and see why there's a jump in the coming fiscal year. With respect to the DSR4, I have two questions. One is, are there any grants available? I know those would be short term, but any grants available that might be able to fund some of this in the short term? And also, could we have a memo that summarizes everything that you just told us about, you know, what the benefits were of the position for the last year? And then my last question has to do with police reform and the effects on the department and where you are positioned with respect to police reform going forward into fiscal year 23, whether you see any need for further funding, or is the Needham Police Department in a good position for fiscal year 23?
Okay.
Thank
that
you
was
for those
a lot.
questions, Louise. I want to say one of those questions about the DSR4 is my fault for not, the chief did send me a write-up and I forgot to forward that to everyone else. So I'll send that to Louise and she'll be able to forward that to everyone. Go ahead, Chief.
In terms of police reform, I think we're current where we're at right now with the regulations, but unfortunately, when they did this reform, they kind of rolled it out without any infrastructure in place. And so it's coming out kind of piecemeal. So we're trying to keep up with that. And I don't think we do have a clear picture on what's going to be required in terms of training. I think we're in a good position in terms of the training that we do already. So I'm not sure that we're going to see a huge increase in training. I think the training increase that we'll see will be a result of having so many younger officers that'll be on the force in the coming years, that younger officers that we like to make sure that they receive adequate training in addition to what we do on a mandatory basis. So that's where I see the increase in our training budget will come from. And again, as it rolls out from the police reform and as we get information from the post commission, it's going to be kind of something that we're on the run as we're doing it, and we'll have to make adjustments as it does come out. And I don't believe that there are any grants for that position because they're legacy grants that the jail diversion program. So the legacy grant, meaning that when you get it, they're maxed out. And the only way that we applied several years back with the Board of Health to try and get these grants, but them being legacy grants, people aren't giving up the money, so we're not able to access those grants. The motor vehicles, the cruisers. So a couple of years ago, we made the change. We used to buy the 4 cruisers, frontline cruisers every year. But what we found out is, and obviously it's something that has been impacted by COVID, which makes it even worse in terms of getting cars. We found out that as we were trying to order cars, they were kind of backing up on each other, and we weren't keeping the cars long enough, and we felt that the mileage and the use of the vehicles, we were getting rid of them or trading them out or auctioning before we felt that it was operational or financially necessary. So we transitioned to buying the frontline sector cars every other year, so that they wouldn't be backing up on them every year. So this gives us a little bit more leeway, but we also extended the warranty, which would protect the vehicles that are going to be there for an extended or a greater period of time. And so that's why we felt, we did it that way. And that's why it kind of goes up and down. You have that 4 cars, used to have it every year, and now it's every other year. So it goes 4, and then the next year it will be maybe 2 administrative vehicles or detective vehicles, or one of the back end cars. So that's why you see the fluctuation, but there was a reason behind it. And I don't know if I answered all the questions.
I had one more about the Citizens Academy.
Oh,
So we had 1,000 for the junior academy.
so we had 1,000 for the junior academy. We just finished up the Citizens Police Academy, and we did use some of that money for supplies and whether refreshments and so forth. We weren't sure exactly what the cost would be. So next year we'll kind of look at it after we do our second one and kind of adjust from there. But we just finished it up about 2 weeks ago.
Thank you.
Dave, go ahead.
And to the question about fuel, the guidance that I had provided departments for 23 is a price of $3.67, which is a significant increase over the amount that was the guidance for the budget year that we're in. It's about a 50% increase. At this point, we're still some time off before 23 starts. I think that guidance will still work for the budgets. However, the Finance Committee should be aware that we may need reserve fund transfers as we get closer to the end of this fiscal year, given, as Ms. Miller mentioned, we're paying over $4 a gallon, and the budgets were built on a price estimate of $2.45 a gallon.
Thank you for that, Dave. Carol, did you have a question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's several younger police officers that you feel are potentially questioning their role and service to the police force. Can you kind of quantify how many of your, I guess, 48 police officers positions are at risk, this year, and have you kind of factored in the higher cost of turnover and, into your budget? And then secondly, what other kinds of retention, what are the retention efforts and programs, if you will, that you can offer kind of these at risk, if you will, younger officers?
So the total number, so it's not anybody, they haven't come to me and specifically said that, but it's kind of information and feedback that I get from, some of our supervisors and so forth. And I want to say that to the best of my knowledge, that there was 3 or 4 officers that may look to kind of go into the fire service or ultimately another profession, and trying to factor that in. So when we do that, when we go to hire somebody, we're looking at from the starting of the hiring process under civil service to graduation from the academy and getting out of the field training program, we're looking at 1.5 years. So we'll be able to, when we know that we have vacancies, we'll be able to adjust in the next fiscal year, because it does take that long by the time we get them in, we get them on the payroll, and we get them in the academy. So part of the contract negotiations that we're dealing with, we're talking about some things that we're trying to address within the contract that might, help retaining officers. One of them being educational pay, to make sure that we're on par with not only other communities, but that we're the same within the Needham Police Department. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. And also just, working on officer wellness and trying to reinforce that, it's a good community, it's a good town that supports us, and that it is a difficult time right now in this profession, but as long as we remain and stay the course, that this will pass. Obviously there are things that we have to do to make sure that we're making sure that we're servicing our entire community, but it's one of those things where you just have to make sure that you're talking to the officers, trying to stress the good things that are going on and the good things that are within the department, and that it really is a noble profession. It is difficult, but that it is worthwhile, and it's a career that we feel that is worthwhile to us and the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I have a couple questions just about the clinical support position. That's the DSR4. When we met, I think you provided a lot of helpful context, specifically about the beds, how this person has access to beds and access to medical records that I don't believe our clinical staff in Health and Human Services or other departments would have. So that seems like an advantage, and a differentiator from other clinical staff in town. I was looking through, you provided counts of types of response for this position since it was hired in December 2020. And so the types of response were co-response with, I presume, Officer Forte, follow-ups, evaluation, unable to make contact, and decline service. I just noticed that the co-responses with the officer were lower than some of the other positions, so between 0 and 2 per month, and the bulk were in follow-ups. So I guess I was curious, is that partly due to this position being shared with Dedham? Is it hard to get this person for co-responses? And if so, is there an unmet need where there could be co-responses that cannot currently be fulfilled?
Well, I think, it's a combination of, we are splitting it, 20 hours with Dedham, but it's also scheduling. So, we are 24/7. So a lot of times some of these calls that might, if there was somebody to do a co-response, we would do it. But unfortunately, due to scheduling, that's not always the case. But so that's why you see, an increase in the follow-ups, because the work that they do after the fact. So what happens is, if we have officers that respond to, whether it be mental health, substance abuse, domestic, elder affairs issues, those reports get forwarded to the community outreach officer and the clinician, and they begin the follow-up process. And, so they're able to do that. That's where the follow-ups are important. If we could have the co-response, that would be great. But it's not always the case. An emergency response is an option, but it's not something that we do quite often, because we are seeing great benefits from the follow-ups and the impact of those. And they sit down and have numerous follow-ups with the same individual. And it kind of opens the lines of trust, and they feel comfortable calling them when they're in need. And the impact of that is it takes off a future emergency response from our patrol shifts. So I think as the program develops too, it'll be a little bit more fluid. The clinician that we had was promoted I want to say it was in August. So we've been working without the embedded clinician from that time on, but they just hired somebody, so we're getting that back in line. But we were able to use the resources from Riverside 2 to help. Our community outreach officer already has those connections with them and other resources that he can, kind of do patchwork to get those people the resources they need. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's one of those things. The two biggest thing is it's 20 hours, but it's also scheduling, because we do a lot of calls outside of the hours that clinician might be here.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned that the position, the person in the position had been promoted, so there's a time where there was no one in the position. I guess from a financing standpoint, do we still pay for that position when it's vacant?
We don't. So we get billed monthly, and we don't. So she kind of worked part-time doing her job at Riverside and working with Dave for the first month and a half. But no, we don't. But we expect that's going to start this month. I envision that party is going to be in place by the end of the month here, and in Dedham. So we'll go forward with where we're at.
And so do you envision in the future an increase in the number of hours that would be devoted to Needham? Or I suppose that would, it could take different forms.
Yes, it's something I think as we're looking at. We only have a certain amount of data already. It's been effective, but it's something that as we go, if we need to make an adjustment, we definitely would look into that. But it's hard to say right now if that's something that we could put somebody in place for 40 hours. But it's obviously we review, what goes on and the calls for service and the outreach and so forth. And we can make a decision in the future about the needs to increase the hours.
So keep an eye on the grant in
Okay.
case the governor decides to make
And-
more funding available.
And we'll also, we also continue to monitor the grant to see, just to make sure to see if the governor makes more funding available. But as of now, there hasn't been any increase in funding.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the chief? Okay. Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And,
Thank you.
and
Yeah.
Have a good night.
have a good night.
Good night.
So
Chief,
the
I'm
next,
back.
thank you, Dave. The next item on the agenda is the Finance Committee budget. So let me pull up my notes. This is on tab 7 of the binder. The budget includes salary for an executive secretary and committee expenses. The Personnel Board recently recommended a salary increase for this position, which I fully support. All other line items in the budget request remain unchanged from the current budget. Are there any comments? I would just say that I'm very supportive of our executive secretary. I think she does an amazing job.
You're here.
Any comments? Okay, we'll move on. Revenue update. Dave, thank you. I'm going to turn to you, I think, for a lot of questions about this. I was hoping that we could have an update on revenues, given that well, the select board recently voted to maintain the same split between commercial and residential tax rates. So I was just curious if you could give a quick summary on the rate of growth and valuations and the tax levy, and if there are any considerations that you think we should keep in mind moving forward.
Certainly, and that's correct. Select board voted to maintain the ship, which is the maximum amount the town is allowed to ship from the residential properties to the commercial properties. There was a decline in some commercial values, which was anticipated. The assessors were pleasantly surprised it was not as great as some had thought. Folks that were turning in their income and expense reports were showing that that most of the large properties did not need to make any concessions in rental income, and that their tenants, whether they were there or not, were paying the bill, which was very helpful. There was some consideration and concessions made by some of the smaller commercial establishments, and with adjustments in rent, whether it was a decrease or an extension in time to pay. They did see some of that, and that was some of where the decrease in commercial valuation resulted. However, we had a significant increase in which helped offset those decreases in commercial growth, particularly from the utilities. All that inconvenience that folks have been dealing with for the last year and a half with the road construction between the expansion and upgrading of the natural gas and the in the work to put the transmission wires underground has resulted in a significant investment of over $35 million, which is all taxable by the town, and that helped certainly to offset some of the decreases in the retail commercial establishments.
Dave, quick question about that. Is that classified as personal property or new growth?
It's classified as, well, it's new growth because new value, but the classification it falls under is personal property. The utilities equipment is considered personal property, which when people always hear personal property, it's really business property, but it's the class, but it's called personal property, and it's taxed at the commercial rate. The new growth in residential activity continues to remain very strong. That didn't debate at all during the last year and COVID. There was actually a continued strong residential market. There's still much residential development happening. I think all the committee members have seen that the tear downs continue, even with the change in the zoning to try to reduce the size of the large houses, hasn't caused a slowdown in construction. As the developers getting a little more creative in terms of their design, and there were some zoning changes that actually allowed developers to in home construction to be a little more aesthetically pleasing, which has increased their ability to market the homes at a high price. The town is officially now a $1 million home, that the average value is over $1 million now in Needham for residential property. The not unexpected, the 2001 actual local receipts were lower than FY20 actual receipts in all the areas that we had anticipated. So the committee would recall, we made adjustments to a number of our local receipts estimates, which proved to be prudent in that those declines did happen, but we did not have any revenue shortfall, meaning that revenues did not come in under estimates. But we also needed to adjust, which we did, adjust our final estimates for FY22, the year that we're in. We were pleasantly surprised that meals tax and room tax were slightly better than we thought, and as a result, we were able to increase those estimates. But other areas, such as interest income, we had to adjust that downward because, as folks know, interest rates just bottomed out to the point that we were receiving next to nothing in terms of our receipts, in terms of our interest earnings on our balances. The motor vehicle excise, there was definitely a drop down in that, and we adjusted our estimate for FY22. But again, there have been no surprises where we thought things were going to slow down. They did. Where we thought things were going to be better, they were. For instance, trash fees, there was an increased activity at the RTS in terms of trash, both that brought in by residents, that brought in over the scale, and that brought by commercial operations. And in fact, when you get to the DPW budget, that's one of the line items. Trash associated expenses are up, but so isn't the income associated with the trash. And state aid, there were no reductions to state aid. State aid was the governor's budget was positive, and the legislature passed a budget that gave the town a few $100,000 more than what the budget plan had anticipated, which is reflected in the estimates now for fiscal 22. In the next, over the next 6 weeks, we'll be updating our estimates for FY23. The governor will release his last budget at the end of January. I do not anticipate that there'll be a reduction in any of the state aid categories for 23, and we should have a good sense in the next 4 to 5 weeks if there'll be any increases in those revenue streams. But I'm not anticipating any reduction in state aid. The question is what will be the growth rate in state aid, particularly in Chapter 70, which is education aid, which is the significant portion of what Needham receives. And Mr. Chairman, that's my short summary of revenues in terms of 21 to 20, 22 adjustments, and a precursor of what we'll be seeing, what the committee is going to see in about another 6 weeks in terms of the revenue estimate going into 23.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. Does anyone have anything to discuss or questions to raise? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Just a quick question, Dave. Do you have an estimate of what the annual average tax increase will be for property owners, for homeowners?
For this past, for the 22, the average was up by just under 5%, which is the lowest rate of increase in about 4 years.
Thank you.
And Dave, I recall that the rate of increase of the taxes is proportionate to the rate of spending, correct? So the larger the budgets, the larger the town spends, the more the town has to raise in revenues. So is that accurate, Dave?
It is accurate. However, there is a cap on property taxes that you can't raise any more than without an override than is allowed under Prop 2.5. So there was excess, what's called excess capacity. In other words, the town had the ability to tax more or to appropriate more, and it did not. And that was a little over $600,000.
Okay, thank you.
And the difference is excluded debt.
Yes, excluded debt, but even excluded debt, the amount that we were raising this year is less than what we raised last year because we peaked out in terms of excluded debt of all the projects that have been authorized. Even though the public safety building is not yet completed, we still have passed the peak year of excluded debt. The only way the debt will excluded debt would increase is if there are new projects approved in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Dave.
Yep.
And I think at some point in the future, we'll also schedule a pro forma. So we'll be in touch about scheduling that. The next item is a working group update of the school master plan extension study. I just wanted to give an update to the rest of the committee. I've been sitting in on the meetings. So these meetings are a result of the reserve fund transfer request that was approved on August 18th, 2021. And we've had, I believe, 6 meetings so far, and I believe the final meeting is due to take place on December 14th, 2021. We've just discussed many things. So there are programmatic elements. It's essentially more detailed and refined look at the master plan study that was originally conducted with the aim also of increasing the affordability over time so that it does not impact upon the debt financing as much as some of the previous estimates. I had a couple slides that I put together just to summarize. So let me share my screen. I can show people. I also want to note Ann Galati and Dan Gudekanst are on as well. Dave, if they would like, feel free to bring them over. Oh, it looks like I can't share.
I will correct that, and I'm bringing in the superintendent.
Thank you, Dave. We discussed many more things than I put in the slide. Some of it was looking at the enrollment forecasts. Welcome, Dan.
Mr. Chair, you should be able to show your screen now.
Okay, let me try that. Yes, I can. Okay. I'll just make this bigger. So, yeah, as I said, it discussed the scope of the extension is to look at 4 additional scenarios to supplement and refine the original master plan study. It was funded through the reserved fund transfer. And one of the purposes is to develop scenarios that spread the capital costs so that borrowing costs are affordable within the town's debt limits. The 4 scenarios, these are labeled in accordance with the previous labeling convention.
Excuse me, Josh.
oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I don't see anything from your screen.
Yeah, I don't have it either.
Oh, interesting. I'm sorry. Let me get it back. Hold on a second. Zoom always makes it one extra click. Okay. Can everyone see?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So these are the 4 scenarios that are labeled in accordance with the previous master plan. So there was previously a C and D that we had discussed. There are refined C and D scenarios that were studied, as well as a refined scenario A and scenario E, which was added and was not in the previous study. At a high level, 2 of these, A and E, are status quo grade configuration scenarios, where each school has the same grades as after being rebuilt as they currently do. C and D, the difference is that Pollard would be made into a 6 through 8 school. So the current 6th graders at High Rock would be at Pollard, and High Rock would instead be an elementary school. Then other variations within these are whether or not the schools are proposed to be funded by MSBA or proposed to be funded without MSBA support. In the status quo scenarios, in addition to Mitchell and Pollard, there are provisions for, in addition to High Rock. So that's because as a 6th grade center, there is identified overcrowding at High Rock. And so if it stays as a 6th grade center, there would, it's foreseen that there would need to be an addition. If it's as an elementary school, there is not any foreseen overcrowding as an elementary school. And then in scenario E, there's a potential for a requirement to add an addition to Elliott as well. And so this is, I want to say, like, this is, the report is not yet complete. I believe that's expected to be done at the beginning of January. So it's possible that some figures may change, but I think that most of the details are probably going to look somewhat like this, as I've laid out. On the last slide, just as I said, the details could change, but these are just preliminary numbers. And also years to complete all of the component projects. Just green, for instance, are all the Mitchell building projects within each scenario. Yellow is Pollard, orange is High Rock, and then blue is for Elliott. And so you see the estimated costs. Again, these could change a bit, but these are just what we're discussing at this point, and then the time to complete. So I just wanted to give that update and allow the committee to ask any questions. And if Dan or Ann want to add anything as well, I welcome your input. Anyone have anything? Go ahead, Barry.
So those revised assumptions and timeline, is that the timeline is extended out solely to keep us within the 10%?
So that's one consideration. I think if if there was a desire to approach the MSBA with one or more projects, then that may also impact the timelines. But I think extending it was one chief concern about the initially proposed financing, that it would be a lot of spending within a short period of time.
And the the projects that we would go to the MSBA, the assumptions in those cost estimates, do they assume some level of MSBA funding?
No, the consultants do not feel comfortable and actually have been told by the MSBA not to bake in any costs. So those costs are gross. They do not yet factor in any reimbursement from the MSBA. But in any event, if there is reimbursement from the MSBA, the town would have to bond the money up front and only be reimbursed afterwards.
And remind us, what was what for Sunita Williams, the level of reimbursement? Do you know, Dan? Offhand?
Dan or Dave, I don't know that.
A number like 15%,
It was,
20%.
on the eligible cost, it was approximately 30.
Okay.
And
I think
Anne
sorry.
already had her hand up, so I'm bringing her in.
Oh, yes, thank you. Hi, Anne.
I believe it was about 25% of the total project cost.
Okay, that's helpful.
And Josh, is the non-inclusion of money from the MSBA just because they don't want to make a guess, or is there some sort of concern that the MSBA program is changing?
I'm not aware of any changes. I think
Okay.
they're concerned that they don't want to make a guess, and the MSBA doesn't want to make it appear as though they're committing funds because they have been known to decline applications and not invite people into the program.
Thank you.
I think just as another note, I think once the final report is in, the group I think has discussed asking Dave to input some of these parameters into his debt forecasting scenarios similar to last time, so that we can project what the debt burden would be in each year.
Josh, is there is a part of this study, or is there any sort of placeholder for putting in what the operating, or just an estimate or a placeholder for the operating cost of having a 6th elementary school? Because right now we have 5, and so obviously if High Rock was to become the 6th elementary school, there would be a whole new series of teachers and other personnel for the school. Is there any attempt in these to put a placeholder so that we know what those operational costs could be?
I don't know, Dan or Ann, have you seen that?
No, we haven't, Mr. Chair, and we certainly, as we get into a final report, I think that Ann and I could, put together what I'd call a pro forma, a look ahead to what we think. But that's not part of what the designers are doing now. Certainly something that Ann and I could work on as a very rough, estimate.
Right, because I do think that I understand it might not be what they're, but to compare apples to apples and to really have an accurate cost, right? You have comparison of the different ones. If one is in fact a new school, just not because it's a new Mitchell school, but there's a new 6th elementary school, that makes that scenario, I think, look different than others, and that should be at least noted in some way or recognized in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
Is there any discussion, Josh, about what, when you say non-MSBA, yes, MSBA, that will there be any further clarity on that when deciding upon which of these scenarios to go? Because if you consider Pollard as an MSBA project and then you don't get it, that might be a lot different than saying we go first with Mitchell, which if I was going to go to Vegas, I would bet that we would get supported on that. And so, in trying to get apples to apples, oranges to oranges, I think there's going to be a little more information needed on that, so the decisions can be made in that sort of equal way.
Yeah, I don't know what conversations the superintendent might have had with the MSBA. I know in the conversations among the group, there just is uncertainty about what the MSBA is willing to fund. So I think the question is about how soon we can get building projects started, and the trade-off is, can we get reimbursement, but is it worth waiting?
I think too, Mr. Chair, it be worthwhile to cost out, if you got MSBA funding for Pollard first, then what the cost, estimating if we got a 25% reimbursement, what might that cost for all the projects? If we didn't get funding, what would that cost? I imagine we can, look at those different pathways to see what we might want to do. And I haven't had any conversations with the MSBA. I think one of the discussion points will have to be, when is it appropriate to file a statement of interest describing our problem? That is likely not this year, probably next year, meaning FY20 later in FY23. But I think that's to be determined. So we'll work on these different cost scenarios as Josh suggested. I do want to say I appreciate we've had several meetings, and they've been long meetings, and Josh has been an eager partner and very much engaged, asking a lot of good questions from a different perspective and contributing to the conversation. That's been really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's been a good group. Anne had her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to note is that the architects are costing out, or will be costing out, the impact of not doing MSBA projects when that allows for a shorter construction timeline, and therefore cost savings due to not having to escalate over years. Without MSBA, you can usually do a quicker project. So sometimes there is a trade-off in terms of, although you don't get MSBA funding, you can do the project more quickly, and there is offsetting cost savings there as well.
Yeah, and it's just, I guess, weighing whether those cost savings are more than what would be reimbursed. I guess we don't know.
Yeah, well, even if you use just use $100 million project and a 25% reimbursement, that's 25 million. You're not going to achieve 25 million of savings and doing it quicker than you would if you went with that program.
Correct, but you may be able to do multiple projects more quickly because you're not waiting on MSBA.
Carol, I think did you have a question?
Yeah. So my question is there some type of, industry guideline or on what is the interval between MSBA project funding, or is it very school specific? So if you received MSBA funding for Mitchell, then would you have to wait 10 years, or what is the kind of barometer that's used to look at that?
Mr. Chair, and the MSBA doesn't really provide that kind of information, or at least not publicly. What they will say is it's based on the community's needs and their capacity to fund as many projects across the Commonwealth as possible. If I hope they're not using a 10-year window, because if they are, we're not applying for anything for another 7 years. So it is going to be tricky, because they've said no to a few middle school projects recently. Concord comes to mind. Concord's going to do their own project without MSBA. Lexington was rejected again for their high school, and Lexington had completed an elementary school a few years ago. So I don't know. The MSBA knows that Needham is a good partner, and I think we have that going for us. And there are other communities that have needs too. So I don't know. I think a wise thing is to move forward with, if we move forward with a statement of interest next year, for example, I think we should, go into it eyes wide open with a plan B if it were not, for example, accepted into the MSBA pipeline.
And Dan, remind me, what's the timeline for that? What would be the earliest that we would submit a statement of interest?
Well, that's a big conversation for, all the boards to have. They will, and Ann can correct me if I'm wrong, they will presumably open up a window for new statement of interest sometime this winter or early spring. I'll just say, April 1st. I think that's what it was last year, or maybe it was March 1st. They close
Sometimes
it.
it's earlier, January, February, but
Yeah. And they close it by June. And then when they close it, it's sometime later in the summer, they will notify you that they are interested in, having a conversation with you. That's not a guarantee that you're in the process, but a conversation. So that first year is really a long year of just waiting, frankly. And then once you're invited into the process, you have a certain amount of time to, get going with the feasibility and moving from there. But I think right now it's premature to be thinking about anything for this year, because I just don't think we have, even when the report's done, we're not going to have all the answers. I think there still needs to be some conversations about what we need to do, certainly with the community. So these projects are, I think they're coming. I think that we can support them. I hope we can support them in the town. I'm not sure what order yet. I would guess Pollard is probably more likely, because we need space to put Mitchell students if we did Mitchell first, and we lack that space right now. But it's one thing at a time, and it's going to take a while to get all these projects off the ground. It's going, as Josh's slide suggests, the earliest any of them could be done would be 11 years from now, and I think that's pretty aggressive.
Thank you, Dan. Anyone else have anything else they'd want to add? Okay. So again, this is just an update. It's not a final say. As Dan said, there are a lot of more conversations to come. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Ann. Take care.
Thank you.
Next item is issues not reasonably anticipated. I don't have any right now. I would just update the committee that we do have a meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, December 15th. The Department of Public Health, Department of Health and Human Services updates their COVID numbers every Friday. So I'll take a look at those over the weekend and we'll send an update on whether that's hybrid or remote. Okay. Does anyone want to offer a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second,
We'll take a roll call. Rick,
yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you, everyone.